blah, 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 blah.
Welcome to the Our Forever Smiles podcast, a podcast created to support mothers of children who were born with clefts and those who love them. I'm your host, Laura Arroyo, and I'm also a mother of a daughter who was born with a surprise cleft palate. I know the challenges you face every day. Whether you have just learned the difficult news of your baby's cleft lip or palate, you're in the midst of pre-op or post-op, or you're an OG cleft mom, this podcast is for you. In a weekly conversation, we will talk about everything from feeding and speech therapy to surgery and school. We'll share tips from guest experts and advocates and even share a little joy in the process. You can listen to Our Forever Smiles wherever you listen to podcasts. Don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned. Hello, and welcome back to the Our Forever Smiles Cleft Mom Diaries and Support podcast. I am Laura Arroyo. Before we jump into this episode today, I would like to invite you to join this community to hear conversations with other cleft moms and advocates that will help you feel supported along your journey. All I want you to do is click on the Facebook group page that is linked in the episode notes. You can speak directly to the guests from this podcast, ask questions, and talk to a community of cleft moms that are eager for answers but also willing to help. As a note, we are not medical doctors, and we do not intend for you to use information that we share here as medical advice. We are parents and advocates who love our children, and we are sharing our own personal experiences. Today, we have Dana on the podcast today. Dana is a mom of two, and her second daughter is cleft affected. She is a loving wife and a teacher as well. So with Dana, her daughter has a unique cleft, so I'm not really quite sure the right questions to ask or how to deep dive into this just yet, but I love, as you all know from listening to the podcast, I'm a very curious person, and that's really why I started the podcast, is because I couldn't stop talking about clefts. And I'm also I just want to know, and I love talking to families and hearing everyone's story. So welcome, Dana.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me today.
It's so wonderful to have you. So I've heard of, is it pronounced a Tessier or Tessier?
Tessier is how I've heard it said. Tessier 7 is what we were told that she has.
Oh, wow. Tessier. I see, the whole time I was calling it something else.
I think it's French.
Yeah. I've heard of different Tessiers. Like I know another one that I've heard is Tessier 30. And so your daughter was diagnosed with Tessier 7. So what is Tessier 7?
Hello, everyone. Sorry to interrupt, but I need a little bit of help. If you're listening to this on the Apple Podcast app or YouTube, you may see a follow plus sign or subscribe button. If you're able to, it would mean the world to me if you could follow or subscribe. That's the best way to support this show. If you subscribe, I'm able to show it to potential guests or different brands. It helps to grow the show and reach more communities to continue building awareness about the cleft lip and palate journey on a global scale. Thank you so, so much. Back to the conversation.
So it basically means that it's on the side of the mouth. So when my daughter Lexi was born, she had a more severe Tessier 7, and it was like the corner of her mouth was like connected in the back of her throat. So the whole side, her whole left side was open. I've seen other Tessiers that are smaller, maybe that just go out to just a little bit, an inch or two, but hers went all the way back to the side of her throat.
Wow. So can you tell me about when you found out about Tessier 7 or the cleft in general?
Sure. We didn't actually find out until she was born. It was a bit of a surprise to us, although looking back at our ultrasounds now, we can see it. But at the time, and because it is so rare, the ultrasound techs, the doctors didn't say anything about it. And I think part of it is because, so we had ultrasounds like every month when I went. And that was because she was a twin originally. And when they did the first ultrasound, the second sac was just empty. So there were two sacs, but one was empty and the other was Lexi. And so every month that we went, they would do an ultrasound. She almost always had her hands up by her face. And so that was one reason why we couldn't see it. And in the one ultrasound picture that you can see it, and now looking back that we can tell that's what it was, the nurse said, oh, she must be sucking her thumb and she must be sucking really hard because she sucked in her cheek. And so they thought that it was literally her sucking hard enough that her cheek sucked in, almost like when you do fish lips.
Yeah.
And that's what it was. But it was when she was born, and she was a planned C-section because my first was an emergency C-section. And then when they were talking, I could hear them talking about, saying to my OB, saying, hey, did you know about this? And I'm like, know about what? They didn't bring her up to me right away. They took her over to the side and were examining her first. And then when they brought her over to me, they said that they thought it was some uterine bands that I guess didn't detach the way that they thought they would. And so that's when we found out when she was born. Luckily for us, there was a plastic surgeon at the hospital that day, and he came and talked to us and explained to us it's a Tessier 7. It's also known as a macrostomia, which is the lateral facial cleft. And it was then like a whirlwind. Like, I'm a teacher, and so I like to plan everything and have everything ready to go. So I work at a small private school. And so I had my schedule worked out where I was going to pump, and I had everything figured out, everything that I was going to do. And then she was born and everything went out the window.
Yeah.
And it was like God saying, okay, you think everything, but you don't. He has gotten us through everything so far, and we just really try and rely on him. And yeah, that's when we found out when she was born.
Wow.
So it was that the research started and everything was just like,
Yeah. No, I also found out when my daughter was born. So I kind of know that feeling of just like everything just being so
yeah.
different than what you imagined that it would be. And in my case, and it doesn't make it any easier, I don't think, but in my case, I was a first-time mom. I'm also like a really organized, and I thrive off of routine. And so I like to have everything in place. And so I did all the research and I did all the things, and I was so ready. And to be like thrown into that when things just didn't work out or make sense in the way that I thought that my first time motherhood journey would be it was really sad. And even now, like I look back on it and just think, I wish I could get those days back with her because, and I knew it in the moment, like I'm a very self-aware person. I like to think I am. And even in those moments, I'm like, I need to like hold her a little bit longer. And everyone says these times go by so quickly. And I just remember myself being so anxious all the time that I couldn't really enjoy her. And so that's really hard to think back on and to just think about my headspace during that time. And so I guess whenever you found out or you finally saw her, what were your feelings and how did your husband react and your immediate family react to that?
Yeah, so it was a little bit difficult. You want to tell everybody everything's happy and healthy and all of that. And then it's not exactly that way. I'm sorry, I get very emotional.
Yeah.
But it's not exactly that way. And it was so brand new to all of us that no one really knew what to expect. Or, the plastic surgeon that was there that day, we didn't end up going with his services. We went with Children's National. But he just explained to us they'll do a surgery to just close the cheek, and then it will depend on how she grows and develops after that. That's what we told everybody, and that's all we could tell everyone. It was harder, I think, to tell the families at my school because we are a small Christian private school, everybody's very close. It's a family at my school. And so just kind of telling them was harder than telling my own family, which I know sounds weird, but I knew my own family would still love and protect and all of that. And when you're telling a larger community, it's a little bit harder, I felt. So the first pictures that we sent out to the school family kind of had her wrapped in a blanket, and you couldn't really see that side of her face. You could just see like her nose and forehead and eyes and everything. And then when I went back to school is when I told my students, I teach middle school. And so some of them were, what? We've never seen anything like that before. We've never heard of anything like this. And I teach math and science. And it happened to be that our science, when I went back to work, was about genetic mutations. And Cleft was one of those things. And I was like, okay. Whoa. And so it was just talking with them about it and helping them to understand. And some of them that have learning differences and things like that could understand. And other ones were like, I just don't get this at all. This doesn't compute to me. And they're, oh, why does her face look like that? And that's hard to hear.
Yeah.
But as far as my family was concerned, my husband was there with me in the delivery room, and he's always very supportive and very loving.
So the plastic surgeon comes in and he shares with you this diagnosis, which thank God you were able to get that information right away, because sometimes, there's a lot of, hey, we got to get a plastic surgeon here, or we got to get an expert here. It's going to be a few hours, or it's going to be tomorrow, that type of thing. And so you're just left to like fester in these like feelings. And I guess after you received that information, what were like your immediate next steps? Were you able to go right into feeding, and what did that look like for you?
So one of the lactation consultants was like, you can still breastfeed your baby. And I'm like, I don't really understand how that could work. Her whole side of her face was just open. And they were like, she could get a suction still with like your breast could fill in the rest of that area that's open so she could still suck. And I tried it out and it just was not. And so they brought me a pump and I did pump there in the hospital. And when we saw the plastic surgeon that we actually went with, which was from Children's National, they recommended the Medela Haberman bottle to us. And that one, the nipple is about this tall. And I guess that's maybe 3 inches for those that are just listening. And you squeeze it to get the milk into the baby's mouth. And so I did end up pumping for a little while, but then it became like once my husband had to go back to work because he couldn't take off as much time as I could, he went back to work. And then I was at home with a 3.5-year-old. That's my older daughter. And then the baby. And it was like, I would pump, I would then feed her. And then by the time I cleaned everything and washed the bottles and washed the pump stuff, then it was like it was time to start all over again. I maybe had like 10 minutes in between. And then it was like, okay, it's time to pump again. And then pump and feed. And it just became like so overwhelming to me. I was like, I can't do it. And my dad said something to me that at the time he didn't understand. And I think men don't really understand as much. And he said, I thought you were going to pump longer than that. And I was like, but Dad, you don't understand. Like, I physically can't. I'm not able to spend time with my older daughter. I'm not really enjoying my time with Lexi either. And then he understood more and he was like, I'm sorry. But yeah, it was a struggle at the beginning. And then we got the Haberman and I was like, oh. And then we started formula with her after I was like, this is just not, I'll save some breast milk for after her surgery because I have heard that can be like help the healing process and things like that. But yeah, it was a struggle at the beginning.
Yeah. And so so you had someone, like the next steps from when they gave you that diagnosis, did they tell you like what kind of surgeries that she was going to have?
Yeah. So once we decided to go with Children's National, he talked us through like everything to expect. And so at 3 months, she had her first surgery, which was the closure of the side. They told us that it would probably be about a 3-hour surgery. It stretched to 4.5 or 5 hours. And so that was scary for us. But then he said, depending on what her growth and development is, it will depend on if she needs any other surgeries because her palate was not affected at all. We didn't have any palate surgeries or anything like that. Her lower jaw and pretty much everything on the left side of her face formed improperly. Her left side of her jaw is smaller than the right. And so all of her teeth that have come in are shifted over to that side. She has on the left side, the lower jaw, only one molar has come in, and she's about to be 8 in October and has only gotten the 2-year molar on that side.
Mm.
And so when we go to the dentist the next time, they said, we'll do the 360 x-rays so that they can see, are there other molars there? Because that was one thing that the Cleft team had told us. She could have missing teeth, she could have extra teeth, or her teeth could be perfectly normal. And so I was like, okay, so really you have no idea.
Yeah.
But what they've said since then, she's had ear tubes put in and tonsillectomy. She had that when she was 2, and then a repeat on the ear tubes because she was getting ear infections, but just on the left side, the side of her cleft. So the second time they put ear tubes in, they only put a tube on the left side. And that was when she was 5. Just recently, last week, Wednesday, she had another tonsillectomy because her tonsils had grown back, which they told us it was like a 3 to 5% chance that they could grow back. Now, this time, after having them removed a second time, they said there's only a 1.5% chance that they could grow back. So I'm like, okay, can we just not be? And then as far as like further surgeries, they said it really depends on her growth and development. Does have a very pronounced overbite. Her lower jaw is much smaller than the upper jaw. And so they said eventually they will do a surgery with probably a bone graft or something like that, where they'll break the lower jaw and extend it out. They want to try and hold off on that as much as they can. They said as long as she's able to eat and function, they'll hold off on that as long as possible. And probably when she's a teenager, when she has stopped growing, they'll definitely do one then. But before that, depends on how she grows.
Yeah.
So we're hoping to hold that off as much as possible.
Yeah, there's a lot of unknowns, I think. I know even with Giselle, it was just like, we'll have to see how she grows or how she does. And so it sounds like even just the thought of, oh, we would have to break her jaw and do these things, right? I know like me, I can tense up just like thinking about all of the things that she has to go through. And so how do you, that initial surgery, right? The first surgery that she had, which was to close her cleft. How did you prepare for that?
With a lot of prayers, a lot of prayer, and a lot of support from my family. My mom and my sister and my mother-in-law were all there on the day of surgery. And of course, myself and my husband were there as well, down at Children's National in DC. And we started in the waiting room, and then the nurse came out and gave us an update probably 2.5 hours in. And I said, it was supposed to be a 3-hour surgery. And they said, it's taking a little bit longer. Everything's going really well. Everything's fine. It's going to take a little bit longer. And so then at that point, we said, okay, let's walk around. Let's go get something to eat. Just kind of, you're just waiting and you don't know how long it's going to be. And so we went to get something to eat. We came back and we're still waiting and waiting. Lots of praying going on and just trying to keep it light. But how do you keep it light when you don't know? She was only 3 months old. And after the surgery, when we went back to see her, I just thought, oh my goodness, she's so tiny in that bed. And it was already a small bed because it's children. And so they had the tiny bed, but she looked even smaller in there. And our surgeon decided to do the Z-plasty, which means that her scar is like a zigzag. It's a shape of a W. And as she has grown, different kind of stages, we would see that one time, well, she was about 2.5, I think, and she was looking in the mirror and she was rubbing and rubbing. And I was like, what are you doing? And she said, there's something on my face. And I said, oh, her first like realization of that she had a scar there. That's how old she was, about 2.5. That was hard for me. For her, it was just, oh, there's something on my face. But now as she's grown, we've turned it into something very positive for her. And we call her a wonderful warrior because it is in the shape of a W. And she has become more aware, of course, now. That first night in the hospital, and we just had an overnight stay. It was tough. It was a lot of crying. They gave us the special bottles and, of course, the no-nos that you have to restrict her arms. The bottles they gave us then were just the little squeeze bottles that had a soft tube on the end. And they sent us home the next morning. And I was like, I don't know what to do, kind of thing. And at that point, she was drinking a little bit. When we came home then, in the next couple of days, we ended up going back to the ER because I was like, she's not eating. And they sent us back home again and said, as long as she has one wet diaper within 8 hours or whatever it was. But I just felt, oh my goodness, it's just crying. It was a lot of crying. We rocked and bounced and walked and all of that for like several days until I finally figured out. And this is like a little tip for any moms, that if your baby doesn't like the special bottle with the tube milk, but they like the Tylenol, she loved the Tylenol. She would take the Tylenol fine, but the milk she didn't. And so I had my two hands, one that had the little plunger with Tylenol and one that had the bottle with milk. And I would squirt a teeny bit of Tylenol and she would take it. And then I would squirt some milk.
I would do the same thing. I would put
and then back and
forth.
I
would put the medication in the nipple. I would put the valve on it, and then it would be on a bottle of milk. So she would take the Tylenol, and then it would be followed by like the milk. And so it was literally genius. It was actually one of the things that my fiance told me to do, which I was like, wow, that was one of the smartest things that you've told me this whole time. But anyway, sometimes, just as you said, you get unsolicited advice sometimes from people that is like, yeah, but you're not really like in this.
Yeah. You don't know. You haven't been here.
Yeah, it's fascinating. But so when you saw her initial repair, though, what did she look different? What I've heard so many moms say, oh, I didn't recognize my baby and I wasn't expecting that. So is it the same?
No, because it was on the side, that's just where it was. And she was swollen and things like that. As she has grown, I feel it's almost like the scar to me has become more noticeable as she's grown because she had that baby fat in the cheeks.
Yeah.
I feel like when she was younger, it wasn't as noticeable. And as she has grown and lost that fullness in both of her cheeks, now her right cheek is more full and the left cheek is less. But he said that the surgeon said that he did the Z-plasty, which makes the W scar, because as they age, it pulls less at the corner of the mouth. So if they had just done a straight line, then that would more likely pull the corner of her mouth that way. As we've had follow-up visits and things like that, he said I'm so happy with how her lips look because her lips still look, it's not pulled to that side. But
are there like massages or like scar creams that you can do to loosen it up? I know that's what they recommend for the lip down the midline here, but or if you have a unilateral or a bilateral, they recommend doing the massages and the scar cream to help loosen it up and reduce the tightness of it. Is that something that you recommend?
Yeah. So he told us to do like the massage and stuff, but as far as scar cream, he was like, because it's so different, than the unilateral or bilateral. The scar cream and he said silicone sheets, sometimes he would recommend for the unilateral or bilateral. But he said with it being on the side, he said, and he only does Cleft, the surgeon that we had. The first one that we saw at the hospital, he was a more general plastic surgeon and he did all kinds of different surgeons. But at Children's National that we decided to go with, he only does Cleft. And so he's seen tons and tons through the years. And he said with the lateral, there isn't really a cream that helps or like a silicone sheet. He said with the unilateral or bilateral, that's the more, I guess, normal, the more heard of Cleft, I would say, the one that more people have heard of. He said that there are creams and the silicone sheets that help with that. But with the lateral, in his experience, it hasn't made much of a difference.
Yeah, that's good to know. So I think you're obviously so still, even 7 years later, very emotional about talking about your story. And I think that it can be hard for all of us to, relive those details that I think people don't really ask us about as much anymore, especially the further along in your journey that you go. But it's something that you went through and that it's a very difficult time and something to reflect on. And I think even now, every day, or what is it, every 3 minutes or something like that, a child is born with a cleft. So it's happening all around us all the time. And how have you been able to cope with all of this as a mother of two, because you have another child as well? How have you been able to navigate this journey and stay sane?
Sane, that's a funny word. No, we just try and take it one day at a time and one appointment at a time. And I try and ask as many questions, whether we're at the plastic surgeon, whether we are at her pediatrician, whether we're at the dentist. I'm always trying to ask and trying to just continue advocating for her and just keep going. And was when she started school, it was in kindergarten, of course. And that was her first time really being around a lot of other kids. We went to church and things like that, and we were with family a lot. But it was her first time being exposed to other children that hadn't seen her journey, right? So even at church, when we started, she was very small. I think her first time going to church, she was maybe 6 weeks. And we have a very supportive church family. And so everyone that she was in Sabbath school with at church had seen her and they knew, and that was just Lexi. And so going to school for the first time was her first time being around other children that hadn't seen her journey. Kids are kids and they ask, and not to be mean, but they're curious. Why is your face different and things like that? So she was at my school. It's a K-8 school. And I talked with the teacher, of course, ahead of time and said, if these questions come up, is it okay if I come and talk with the kids? And she was like, yeah, I think that's a great idea. So I actually ended up going in and talking with the kids from kindergarten, first and second grade, because they all have recess together at the same time. And so sometimes the older kids would ask too. And I went in, I showed them the bottles that she used and just explained to them. And some of them raised their hand and they would go, oh, I had surgery too, So different things like that. And I told them, if you ever have any questions, you can ask your teacher, ask Mrs. B. If she doesn't know the answer, then she'll come and ask me. But it hurt Lexi's feelings when they would ask her. So I always try and say to them, ask the adults, because the adults can answer your questions probably better than what Lexi could, and just try to encourage it that. Going into second grade this year, and there are more new kids in her class. And so it might be a thing where I go in again and talk with them, just to alleviate the pressure off of her so that they're not asking her. She has had some interactions with kids that they're like, what's on your face? And we've told her and practiced with her, you tell them, I had surgery when I was a little baby and that's my scar from my surgery, so that she doesn't feel like I don't know what to say at all but also she doesn't have to go into details about it either.
Yeah. What has been her response to those conversations that you all have had? Does she seem, because I feel like with kids, it changes, right? There's going to be a point in time. I don't want to speak for your family, but usually I know, like, even with my goddaughter, just in general, just kids, right? There's a point in time where they like when their parents advocate for them. And then there becomes that switch where they're mortified when you go into their classroom and do this presentation. They're like, and I think that second, maybe like even like third and fourth is where they start to be like, do not even step foot in my, they don't even want you to be seen. So what's been her demeanor to your response to that?
Yeah. So right now, she's still very much very trusting, very much, I want you there. She loves that I'm at her school. She loves seeing me in the hallways passing by when they're out on a bathroom break and all of that. And she's always asking for hugs and kisses. And she's still very much in that stage. And when I went in and talked with the different classes about it, she didn't want to be in the room. So she wanted to be out. So I said, okay. She went up to the office and she was looking at books and things like that. And so that, I think for her, she's happy for me to explain things right now, but she doesn't want to be a part of that conversation with her classmates. I think she just feels she doesn't like to have a lot of attention on her. She doesn't want to be the center of attention. She doesn't want people looking at her, kind of thing. But for now, she's happy for me to be the one taking the heat and kind of explaining things to people. And yeah, so that's where we are right now. I'm sure as she gets into middle school, she'll be very much that, oh, mom, you're just so embarrassing. My older daughter is going into 6th grade this year, and she's in that stage now where she's like, having you as my teacher, please don't embarrass me in front of my friends. And I'm like, that's my job as your mom. My job is to embarrass you. That's what I do. But we have a very open communication about it. As she's getting older, and just recently I was looking for a book about with a character with a cleft to read to her. And we found some, and they're hard to find. So any writers that might be listening, start writing books. And when she realized that this character had a cleft, she was like me? And I was like, yeah. And the character is Liam the Lion series. And Liam has a unilateral cleft. And so when she saw it, and it's picture books, she saw the book and she was like, it was like this whole, like her mind was blown. She could not believe there was actually a book about a kid that also had a cleft.
Yeah.
And that was like huge for her. And so since that time, she has become more self-aware, and we've referred to her as being a wonderful warrior, as I said earlier, with her scar being in the W shape, and working on ways to make her proud of it and being like, this is a part of me, and I'm strong and I'm brave and I have courage. We're just trying to build those characteristics and those qualities into her. And so it just becomes a rotating conversation where it's always coming up, and it's always something that we want to be very open with her about, so that she knows that she can ask a question to us anytime, both my husband and I. Now, my husband is a social worker and a therapist, and so we're always trying to keep those lines of communication open, and you can always ask anything. You can always tell us anything, any way that you're feeling, anything that's upsetting you, anything going on in your head, you can share with us. And so it comes up every so often. This past week, probably last Saturday, her cousin was with her, and he was asking some questions about it, like, why was she born that way? And my older daughter asked the same thing when I think she was 6. And she said, if God doesn't make mistakes, then why was Lexi born the way she was? And that was like, wow, it was so hard. And I said, he made her different. and different is okay. Everybody is made differently. We all look differently. Our hair is different. Some people have curly hair, some people have straight hair, and we have different skin tones. And Lexi is definitely not a mistake. And we love her and we support her. And she is going to be so brave and so strong because of the experience that she has and because of the way she was born. We just try and talk about it that way.
Yeah.
And just make it a constant conversation and something that's always open and circling back. And just, we want it to be open.
Yeah. I went to ClefCon actually this month in July, and it's led by Smile Train, but they're wonderful. I believe her title is Community Development Manager or something of that in that realm, but her name is Iva Ballou, and her mother attended the sessions, and we had a debrief at the end of the day where everyone shared their takeaways from the day, and it was really beautiful and enlightening. And Iva's mother spoke, and she said that in raising her, one of the things that she would always share with her is that everyone has a thing. Everyone has something. Yours is just visible. That's it.
Right.
And that shouldn't stop you from achieving your goals and doing things that you want to do. Sorry, I'm getting emotional too. It's okay. That shouldn't stop you from doing the things that you want to do in life, because everyone has a thing. And so, yeah, I just thought that was such a wonderful takeaway from the entire event. But just in going back, I think that you also have been through a lot just being her mother. And I know that you mentioned a little bit about what they thought like some of the causes were. So first, did you feel any sense of loss in the beginning from losing a twin, or what was that experience like in the very beginning?
Wow. In the very beginning, everything was crazy. I had a miscarriage just before I had Lexi. And then you go in, you take your home pregnancy test. Yay, I'm pregnant. And then we went in for our first ultrasound. And the doctor was like, we want to make sure you get in right away. And I was like, oh, okay, right away. I guess it's from the miscarriage before. And then we went in and the ultrasound tech was like, oh, I need to go get the doctor. And I thought, oh my goodness, we had the miscarriage before we had the first ultrasound. You see the heartbeat and it's so exciting and everything. And then I miscarried at about 9 weeks. Wow. So just 2 weeks after we had the first ultrasound. And so when she said, we have to bring the doctor, and I thought, oh my gosh, what's going on? And then
did you know at that point that they were twins?
No. But then when the doctor came in, that's when she told us. And it was like disappearing twin syndrome or something like that. And they said there's 2 sacs, but just the one sac is empty and the other one has a baby. And so they were like, we're really going to monitor you closely through this pregnancy. You'll have ultrasounds every time you come in. And also because of the miscarriage before, they said with those 2 things. And then they said the dreaded words, advanced maternal age. Yeah. I said, oh, please don't say that again. I'm only 35. I don't want to be called geriatric. But yeah. And it was, they just explained things to us then. And then it was just like a whirlwind. It's wonderful because you get to see your baby at the ultrasound every time. And they said the other sac was just going to be reabsorbed by my body. And I was like, okay, that's strange. And I wondered about that. But after she was born, I was asking all the questions like, I had a miscarriage before. Did that cause this to happen? And we had the disappearing twin. Did that cause this to happen? And was it because in my first trimester, I was throwing up all the time. I could get up in the middle of the night from sleeping at midnight and I would go throw up and then go back to bed. I would just wake up. You have to get up. You have to go throw up. And I was very sick. And so they gave me a medicine. I can't remember what it was. They gave me something to help with that. And they said, no, that doesn't cause it. And it was just like this question of, okay, what is it? And they said, does anyone in your family have a cleft. And I was like, not anyone that I knew of in my family. And then my dad said, you have a distant cousin on my side, and he was born with a cleft lip, and it was a unilateral. We never did do like genetic testing as far as to see anything like that. And the doctors basically said it's just an anomaly that happens, a genetic mutation. When they're forming, it's just something that can happen. We did see a geneticist when we went, I think she was probably about 3 years old. And we went at Children's National. We saw probably 10 or 11 different doctors all in one day. We just went from like office to office. And one of them was a geneticist. And they said with cleft, there could be heart issues, there could be kidney issues, there could be spinal issues. And so they sent us for all this other testing to check all of those things. She had an EKG, they did an ultrasound on her kidneys and all of that. And everything came back normal. And they said, it doesn't seem to be, it's just one of those things that sometimes it just happens.
Yeah, I've heard of, I actually heard this more recently, that sometimes the sac can wrap around the baby and like it cuts the circulation off from being able to form fully. And so that's why I was curious if that had come up anywhere. So yeah, I think we all, I think that's the first thing that we do. We want to know what we did.
What did I do? There's a lot of that. What did I do? What didn't I do? What did I not take whatever vitamin or folic acid, or what did I do in the growth and development stages?
Yeah. What is something that you wish people knew about children with cleft?
I think I wish that people knew that it is a long process and it's something that can be lifelong. Summer, I joined some groups on Facebook, and they're either parents of children with cleft and also for people that have cleft. And, some are in their 40s and 50s that that are cleft affected and are saying, this is where I am in my journey. And, I'm still thinking about doing a surgery to revise my scars. So it's something that is a lifelong thing. It's not, oh, you just sew the lip back together and then everything's fine. Oh, it's not really like that. It's a lifelong thing, and it's something that is a growth process, and everyone's growing through all of it. The moms and dads are growing through it. The kids are growing through it. Their siblings are growing through it. Everyone is growing and learning.
Yeah. I think it's so interesting that literally I get that response all the time. It's like what everyone says, it's not an easy fix. And so it is also this kind of battle that like newly diagnosed moms, it's like we're also like, hey, it's a journey, it's not an easy fix. But then we're also like, but it's okay.
Yeah.
Because it is.
It is what it is. And there's going to be tough times. And then there's going to be times that are just, you can just relax a little bit. And trying to find that, I would say, for any moms that are beginning their journey, I think I'm still in the beginning of my journey as a mom. She's only 7. As you're just learning about it, trust your doctors. I would encourage talk with more than just, you don't have to go with the first cleft team that you meet with. You don't have to go with the first plastic surgeon that meets you in the hospital that day. And it's okay to find the ones that you feel comfortable with, even in just, it doesn't have to be like you're asking them all these questions, but who do you feel comfortable with when you talk with them about what the journey is going to be like? Who makes you feel comfortable? And then 2, you might not know, and that's okay. It's okay not to know all the answers all the time.
Yeah. What do you think has been the hardest part of your journey? Was it a diagnosis or feeding or now?
I think the very beginning, and as they learn more about it, the emotional part. At the very beginning, it was like the hard changes, I think, as she grows. The hard at the beginning was feeding, definitely. Yeah. And just understanding like, what is happening. When we would feed her, we had to tilt her to one side because the milk would just run right out, right? The whole side is open. So we had to hold her in a certain way, and figuring that out, even in all the birth cloths and all of that kind of stuff. As she has continued to grow and develop, I think the hard has become the emotional part for her, and her accepting herself and accepting the way that she looks, the way she is, and knowing that she is beautiful and amazing and strong and brave, and all of that become the hard now. So the hard parts change over time, I think, and just having her embrace the journey and myself embracing the journey too, that we just continue to love her and support her and just be there for her.
Yeah. I think people don't realize that it's also physically demanding. I pumped, and I pumped for about 5 or 6 months. And oh my goodness, just like the pumping, the feeding, and having to place them a certain way, and then having them sit up for a certain amount of times, and
Right.
fast, and oh my God, it is like so physically demanding, like on top of just not knowing, just worrying about whether they're going to be okay. And it's so hard to not just focus on that day to day. And yeah, that was really hard. That was really hard in the beginning. And then I can't imagine like trying to empower your child to love themselves. And you don't know what's going on in their minds all the time. You can only welcome as you've shared, like, you can only welcome them to communicate and create an environment for them to do that, and open a safe space to do that.
And like I said, the books have been helpful in helping us to allow that conversation to happen. And so I would encourage parents to seek out books or groups, things that allow you to open that communication.
Yeah. There's a wonderful book by Gloria Madeira. It's called Archie the Clefty, and that one's really good as well if you all are looking for one. But just in closing, what has been the biggest lesson that you've learned along your journey?
I would say just trust the process and take things as they come. Don't try to worry more about it. Just relax through the process and know that your surgeons and your doctors and your child is wonderful and special, and enjoy this time with them, even though it's hard and the hard changes and the differences and in what you maybe thought your life was going to be like with this new one. But just knowing that you can still enjoy it, and you can still just do your best and be your best for your child.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dana, for being here with us today.
It was a pleasure. I'm sorry for all the tears.
No, you're not the first. You won't be the last. It can be really challenging to talk about and also to relive those moments, but it's also good to be able to get them out and to share your story with other people. So thank you.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you all for listening to the Hour Forever Smiles, Cleft Mom Diaries and Support podcast. Be sure to subscribe and submit a review of the podcast wherever you listen. I hope that you've enjoyed this audio experience. Maybe you cried a little, laughed a little, but more importantly, I hope that you feel a little piece of reassurance and even joy in your journey. Talk to you next week.